Spaces, spaces, spaces. To get spaces or not to get spaces? This is a question that a lot of people have, and spaces help in certain instances, and sometimes spaces could be dangerous. So it all depends on your application, and it also depends on the vehicle that you're working on. In some vehicles, you need spaces so you can fit bigger tires, depending on the rim and the setup. In some vehicles, they're so thin, like the build we're doing on the Jimny, that when you go on certain 4x4 tracks, the ruts that are created by bigger 4x4s are just too wide for your little Jimny, so you have to sort of balance the car. And in such instances, it really does help to have spaces on the Jimny. So they are not the safest thing to have on a vehicle, but there are certain things that you can consider that will make them a bit safer and make you a bit more comfortable, give you a bit of peace of mind. So let's just look at two different spaces, and maybe we'll discuss a third one, which is even safer. So let's look at option one, the cheapest option, and in my opinion, the most dangerous. So it didn't take long for me to find these spaces. They're readily available, and they're quite cheap. And it makes sense to save a bit of a buck here and there and put spaces on. However, when you're putting something like spaces, because of the safety aspect, it's wise to spend a bit more and also do your research. With these spaces, they look nice, they're red, and they were actually labeled incorrectly. They might be good spaces, but they were labeled for the Jimny Gen 4, but they're actually for the SJ40, which is why it may have had the problem that I encountered with them. So on this particular spacer, what we found is, first of all, it's not hub-centric, and second of all, the nuts don't actually catch enough thread connecting it onto the hub. So it puts a bit of a danger in my mind, personally, when I think about it, that there is a possibility when you're going fast that something could give. As you can see over here, it's only catching a bit of the thread on the actual bolts that hold the spacer to the hub. And that was a worry in my mind. And that caused me to actually reconsider these spacers and look at something a bit more quality, like I'm going to show you in option 2. As you can see from this short clip, the spacers do push the tires out slightly, and it sort of gives you a sense or a feel of a bit more stability on the corners. However, that is questionable, and I'm sure the pros would have a different opinion on that. But for me, as someone who is a garage lab scientist on my vehicle, it seemed a bit better. However, it's so important when considering spacers and things like this to take the safety aspect into consideration. So option 2 is a much better, higher quality and much more expensive spacer, and you'll see exactly why I like this. I was over here in this clip examining the quality of it, and you can see that it's made from a much higher grade material than the Chinese ones that are imported in, and it's made locally in South Africa. This particular one is made by a brand called Desol, and it's a local company, and I've noticed that a lot of the things they do, they really just put their heart into the quality and making it really nice. So as you can see over here, where the nuts actually hold the thread and hold the spacer onto the hub, they grab much more thread than the previous ones. And this gives me a bit more peace of mind when considering something like spacers, which could be dangerous. So there's a few things to consider when it comes to putting spacers on your vehicle, and I would encourage you to take all these things into consideration, including your local laws that govern the way your tires sit on your vehicle and how far they can protrude out from the fender flares. Option 3 seems to be the safest option, and it sort of gives a bit of peace of mind. And these are hub-centric spaces. As you will see in the example I'll show you, it grabs a lot of thread that holds the spacer to the hub itself, and it's also got a ring in the middle. Now, the ring itself adds a bit more of a safety aspect to the spacer, but the tie is really just held with the force of the bolts holding the rim to the spacer itself, and it's that friction that keeps the tie in place. So these are the safest option. If you can find these and you find high quality ones, they would be the safest option with regards to spacers. But I would like to stress the point once again that the engineers who developed these cars developed them to certain tolerances, and they have a certain design in mind, and everything is calculated for that. So depending on your application, it's wise to consider what you're using them for and how you're going to use them. It's wise also to consider the safety aspect of adding something like spacers and how they can affect the vehicle, and it's also wise to consider the laws and regulations in your country. If you've got all those things dialed in, then why not? Why not get spacers? So that pretty much wraps up what I need to say about spacers, and that's a wrap for this video. We'll be back again with more amazing mods. So stay tuned, share this video with other people who have Jimnys or other builds, and people who like to watch this kind of thing. Until next time, cheers.